Hello and welcome. Amazing late summer's day. Dirt conditions have improved a little bit. And to celebrate that, we're riding the Trek Slash. This is the 9.9 XO model. Big changes this year. They went to high pivot layout. Really cool climbing characteristics as far as like anti-squat. They built this thing with 170 millimeters of travel up front, now 170 in the rear. Really turn it into a full out, kind of like bike park, enduro, racing bike. So not a boring update, a lot going on here. So climbing this thing, first of all, geometry, just really nice and like centered up forward riding position. Even with that 27.5 rear wheel, this thing's over a 77 degree effective seat tube angle. And in the real world, feels super steep. Feels like I'm really far forward. And honestly, I haven't been so far forward on a bike yet that I didn't like it. We got fairly steep climbs around here. It just feels so good and balanced. And like you need that balance to put a little weight on the front wheel, stay comfortable. I was quite surprised first time I rode this bike, just how they had knocked the drag of the extra sprockets in the suspension layout, the extra pulley, the drag of that down. They went to like a larger diameter, which I imagine the less angle change you do on that chain, the more efficient it's gonna feel. And it definitely makes a difference. It's always hard on these bikes to know what I'm feeling, these bikes being high pivot bikes. But I will say this Trek like definitely felt easier to pedal than any other experience I had on a high pivot bike. They do have like an in-house rear tire, but I will say this thing definitely climbs for me like not painfully, which some of the high pivot bikes are quite the workout. Yeah, so this bike was noticeable for having a little bit less chain resistance. With that being said, it definitely does not climb like a bike without the extra pulley. You got one under the crankset to keep things tight, and then your classic high pivot upper pulley. But one of the cool things that high pivot layout gives you is this really consistent anti-squat, and this bike certainly just feels like very supported under pedaling. So it's kind of a interesting mix where you're losing some wattage to just driving that chain around, but at the same time get these really cool kinematics that just feel great. I mean, looking at their chart and matches my experience, it really doesn't change throughout the stroke of the rear shock. Just super consistent. So, I mean, as far as climbing is concerned, I feel like this bike is for somebody who is gonna be doing more, you know, mellow laps, or potentially you're just such a strong climber that you don't mind the kind of penalty of the chain drag. For me, this bike kind of lives in the category of like, love to reach for it if I'm more like shuttling, going to the bike park, doing like a little bit easier to pedal lap. It would be quite hard for me to reach for this kind of bike. You know, if I was going out with my fit friends on a 6,000 vertical 20-mile loop, it would be hard to justify bringing this along, as fun as it would be on the way down. All right, time for the good part. Time to let this thing feast. Wow, dirt is much improved. I can tell you that, holy. And this thing really loves to just charge, kind of like straight line into chunk. Wow, yeah, it's quite confident as you just kind of charge into like loose terrain and roots like we're having here. Some good brake bump dive holes. Wow. Yeah, it's got like a pretty long feeling reach in this large, like a 490 millimeter reach, and just feel like nice and spread out. Yeah, man, this thing really takes care of the trail. Yeah, that growing chainstay high pivot system really does seem to deliver, especially on like the kind of the chassis calming effect of just absorbing bumps. And another really cool thing about this bike is it's my first experience on the new RockShox Vivid, which has felt just really active and fluttery. It's got that really cool compression circuit bypass. And I wouldn't say, like, I personally think it feels like a coil, but it definitely like takes the repetitive hits so well. Wow. That suspension just got nice and deep into the curve on that last one. Just like soaked that right up. I feel like when when things line up with these high pivots, you can just get like these amazing suspension performance moments where you just completely lose the bump and you don't even feel it. One interesting thing about this bike is I do think like that chainstay as it grows kind of plays with your weight bias, and it did lead me to want to kind of slow the rebound a little bit to tame that sensation down. I'm really impressed with like how much energy this bike can absorb. It's definitely like makes the ride easier on my wrists, which is a huge priority for me. I feel like riding bikes frequently on these rough trails and being able to kind of just reduce the strain on your forearms is so nice. And this bike does a great job of that. The frame is pretty like, it doesn't feel like it's zapping me. As I just said, it's a really smooth ride, but it feels very sturdy and does not feel compliant per se. It feels very like direct and trustworthy, and kind of like more on the stiffer side, and just feels for sure like a bike that you could just bomb into stuff. It's feeling really, really good tonight. I got that rear suspension sagged pretty good, and it just ramps up nicely. Not feeling the bottom outs. Just a great feeling, and I don't, on this bike, I don't necessarily notice the fact that I've got a smaller rear wheel, which I usually would on a trail like this. But it just seems to all work together back there and really complement that rear wheel. And I feel like I'm getting plenty of traction and able to hold my pace through all this bumpy terrain, despite not having a 29er in the rear. Yeah, back to when I was first kind of riding this bike, I felt a little bit like I was getting, I guess, thrown around on it a little bit. And I ended up running the rebound just a hair slower, which really helped calm things down. Maybe that Vivid was just too active with the way that the suspension was, but I wonder, as that rear chainstay grows and shrinks, like what impact it has on kind of like the feeling of the bike. Wow, this bike just absolutely absorbed that chunk back there so well. Like really, really well, especially when you consider that it's got a 27.5 rear wheel. Amazing. This thing can definitely drive hard. This is my second time riding these Code Stealth brakes, and they do look pretty cool, but I have noticed that this is the second pair of brakes where I feel like I can just really feel the bite point a lot more than I used to with previous Codes. A lot more predictable, just like where they start braking and how much power you're giving to them. So it's been really nice. And these HS2 rotors seem to pack a lot of punch as well. Yeah. Oh man, it's really fun to just cruise through all the bumps of this bike. Got the Buttercup lyric up front. I mean, it's just, things are so good with the way bikes can absorb energy these days. And I appreciate it. I will say this bike feels like it kind of likes to be in a straight line. Doesn't super like being slashed around as much. Kind of wants to find the straight lines, but when you slow down the speed a little bit, it is a very maneuverable bike still. It just, when you start driving with it, you kind of feel like you want to be going a little bit straighter and just punching through stuff more so than slashing around. Ha! Just realized I'm on a Trek Slash. Nice. A little bit of a yank back there that I couldn't quite make with this bike either. Yeah, and further going into like the pop ability of this bike, I do feel like it takes a little bit more energy to pull this bike off the ground and make, you know, some sketchy double work compared to some other bikes in this category, I guess. Just a little bit more on the ground hugging side. I did have to slow the rebound down to get the bike to ride the way I wanted, and that could be part of it, but definitely more on the traction generating side of things than the pull for every double. It does have a very nice, predictable kind of jump quality to it though. So it feels safe lofting this thing in the air. Yeah. So who's this bike for? I'd say this bike is a little bit more geared towards like the shuttle rider or the park rat. You know, you're riding lifts. This bike just provides like a smooth experience, and obviously you can still pedal it, and it's got great kinematics. It's just got a little bit more drag, so it'd be hard to convince myself to take this out with my fit friends for like an all-day epic. Really yanked for that one back there. Oh, that's fun. Yeah, it's just got a little bit more in the DH category than maybe ever before, and but really cool kinematics, really great suspension, smooth ride. You can punch through stuff so nicely, and it's a great feeling. Big beefy components. Woo! Yeah. So if you enjoyed this review, consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. For the full write-up, head on over to freehubmag.com. Yeah!